Welcome to Cundall Culture Talks in London. Today we have Jonnie with us. Good morning, Jonnie.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jonnie Allen. I'm a partner at Cundall and I sit on the management board. That's my full-time role. My kind of home office is London, but relevant for this, I cover all of our global offices and part of the leadership of the business.
Jonnie, what would you say is your cultural background? Let's start with you.
So I was born in Ireland, in Dublin, but moved to the UK when I was a child, and have lived in the UK pretty much ever since, with short stints in different countries that we might touch on in a bit. But I'd say essentially British.
So all life and you kind of your views and your cultural background was shaping in the UK?
Yes, yes, with lots of family links to other countries and things. And I'd say that's one of the things about the UK, and I mean I've lived the last 20 plus years in London, is obviously it's a very multicultural place. It's hard to sort of see where the strongest influences are on that, but yeah, essentially a big British sort of helping of that.
So how would you describe British culture, or I don't know, London mix of cultures?
Well, I think most people in Britain would probably describe London as a bit different, but yeah, I think it is quite difficult to describe British culture. I was thinking about this in preparation for this, and it's a difficult thing to describe. I mean, I think the UK and London particularly are very multicultural, so there's a huge number of influences on Britain that have gone back literally thousands of years. I think if I was going to say to someone, you know, how do you best adapt and learn to work with the British culture, I'd say one of the strongest things is the British sense of humour. I think the British sense of humour is weird and in itself interesting. But I think if you really want to understand sort of British people, the sense of humour is quite a key part of it. Again, has that sort of regional differences and all the different bits of it. But I think we quite like to kind of laugh at ourselves and laugh at other things. Yeah, I think there's a big element of that. I think essentially we're quite a sort of welcoming and kind culture, and I think there's quite a driven nature to British people. A lot of the time now, the sort of more modern culture is quite sort of unhierarchical. It's probably changed quite a lot over time. Again, I think as we go through some of this discussion, that'll come back a bit. One of the things I love when I join calls with people from across the world within Cundall, our love of talking about the weather, I find really funny. We start calls and without it being prompted, it's not written in our sort of ethos, but we end up talking about the weather almost all the time. And I guess I am British through and through because I love it. I'm fascinated by, you know, if it's in the middle of winter here and it's really freezing in Poland, but it's, you know, nice and warm in Dubai and then roasting hot in Australia, and you're all talking about these things and all the things that go with them. And it seems to be quite a sort of common language within Cundall. I'm pretty sure that, you know, knowing other cultures around the world, talking about the weather isn't such a big deal. So again, it touches on that sort of sense of humour. I find that quite funny, but I also just fall into it because, yeah, talking about the weather is really interesting.
Okay, well, thanks, Jonnie. Looks like it's a very multicultural environment, not only within Cundall or Cundall Global, but also in London and in the UK. Let's talk a little bit about building relationship, and how does that culture, or you know, a blend of cultures, influenced you in work, in building business relationship, and maybe outside? I'm
not just saying this because of the theme of the talk, but I genuinely find it one of the most interesting things. I'm fascinated by people, but I find those mix of cultures and what makes someone who they are, you know, in all senses, in all the sort of effects on them, but particularly the cultural ones that tend to be quite a big chunk of what makes people. So yes, working in a diverse office, and working in a global business and living in a country with, you know, lots of different backgrounds and sort of friends from all over the world is absolutely fascinating. And I think both because it's a really important thing to understand about people and you're constantly learning. But it also makes you think quite a lot about yourself and that question about what is your culture, because of those forces on you and how people interact and have done for millennia. For me, the biggest thing is I'm fascinated by it, and I guess through my time at Cundall and through my career, that's always been a kind of a theme, is just really to try and understand more and more simple things like the different sort of festivals and sort of religious days and all those sort of things, down to some of the more fundamental things around, the way people live, the kind of rules of society, all those sort of things. And all of that goes into making up, who people are. So yeah, really it's an exciting journey day by day.
And for example, if you would say like building business relationship, how does it work? Let's say if we focus in London, what people tend to prioritize? Is it building relationship through formal meetings and formal arrangements, or more of a socializing thing?
There's a big element of the social side of business, which is changing I think in a really good way, going from a very probably male but sort of alcohol-based setup to being much more sort of interesting mix of different things that we do. But I think all of it comes back to the fact that what we are trying to do is to build stronger connections with people, both within the business, within Cundall, and with those that we work, which is actually a really important thing. I mean, there's a lot of research and evidence within the property and built environment about the success of projects, that if you invest in the relationships of project teams between businesses as to using lots of different measurements, but the outcomes of the project. So actually building those relationships is fundamental, because we're going to be working together for a long period of time, and you do have to work as a team. So yeah, in the UK, I'd say a big part of that is building those informal connections and getting to know each other. On the sort of the international sort of cultural side, so I mean, I think we work on that quite a lot across the Cundall world, and we see that as being important, although obviously culturally sensitive to where it is in the world. And for me, I really enjoy that. I like those connections. I like getting to know people. And yeah, the change in that I think has been a good one. The formal side of it I think is still formal. I think that it's very important that you have those things, and that's probably where you see again a big shift in different parts of the world. In the UK, meetings tend to be less hierarchical, but we still want them to be very structured, and obviously you have to be getting through the outputs and things. And this is something I've been learning quite a lot recently, with the differences in the way meetings are run and the way that pre-work is done in different parts of the world, and what's expected to be the outcome of a meeting is very different. In the UK, quite often there'll be more brainstorming or allowance for brainstorming, rather than coming in with a set idea of these are the decisions. There are those differences, but I think we're always trying to figure out what the best outcome is. And we'll come back to how you sort of learn from those different things, I think, in a bit. But I think for me, that's looking at it, a global business, and how you constantly looking at how you improve, learning from each other in different parts of the world is so critical. But yeah, for the UK bit, I think there's very much the social side, and then there's the formal work side, which
still plays important part.
And it probably has changed less over the last few decades than the sort of informal social side.
Let's talk a little bit about leadership. You are in a global management board, and you're looking at the global business. So what does a good leader look like?
That's a good question. I think that you have to be someone, again, as I said earlier, that wants to learn. I think to work with different cultures, I've spent, definitely my 12 years at Cundall, but in other companies before that, just really trying to understand as much as I can and listen. With leadership, with everything, it's all about listening. But I think culturally, just the listening element is really key. And then I think on top of that, a really, really important thing for me is to look at how different cultures work in different ways, and really trying to understand what the optimum of that is. So there is no right, there is only how do you do things a little bit better. And by travelling around our business and more widely around the world, it's really interesting to see how different people get different outcomes. And I think if you only look at the fundamental of how you deliver a project, for example, I think you're missing the entire cultural element that's behind that. For me, I don't like thinking of Cundall as having a centre, and generally we try not to talk about it in that way, but it is a network of businesses and essentially people all over the world. And we're trying to see which teams and which individuals are doing things that everyone can learn from. And I think culturally that's a really important part of it. But again, that openness of leadership, which is also, I think, really important, allows people to adopt different things that work for their own culture. So we're never saying this is exactly how you do things because this is the way we think is right, because for some people that will be wrong. And that also works with kind of neurodiversity and different ways that you assess what optimal is. But yeah, so when you're looking at a global business, you listen all the time because you're just trying to learn and understand more and more, and there's always more to understand. And then you're also listening for or looking out for how one place is doing something better than someone else, and whether others can learn from that, or whether that's just something that works really well for them.
And have you had any like inspirations throughout your career that you said to yourself, oh, this is the leader I'm looking up to, and that shaped your, leadership
well,
approach?
Well, definitely, yeah. Everything shapes us. You look at people in different ways, and they give you different things. I mean, I had the great advantage of when I started at Cundall, I was working directly for David Dryden, who was our managing partner, and had grown a lot of the global practice and grown Cundall to what it was. And he had a very positive, very driven style. And I think people probably saw less of that sort of listening bit, but he, amazing way of really understanding the business and what was happening, an incredible ability to pick up things and learn. And I learned a lot from that and his speed of doing that. And yeah, sort of analytical brain. In previous companies, there have been people that, yes, have formed the way I work in different ways. And now working within the management board, it's a very interesting, there's a group of 6 of us elected into the management board, all very different. And I think that's what we're really sort of doing at the moment, is learning from each other and working together in different ways to try and make best use of all of our different skills. So there's a real mix of things that have had impacts. One of my first jobs, I worked for a summer in Paris in a kitchen, which was a very different experience. Working in Paris was fascinating, absolutely terrifying, but I loved it. Working in a kitchen, I've done that a few times, absolutely terrifying, but I loved it. Yeah, I learned a lot of what you don't do from that, just generally being shouted at a lot in French. And yeah, the sort of lack of acceptance for someone that's sort of an outsider, but actually just really interesting how you get that, the sort of drive within, the deadlines we work to and the dedication, the absolute drive for quality. It was quite a high-end restaurant we were working in. So things like that, you learn.
Intensity and
absolutely intense, and lots of sort of what not to do. I've worked in lots of bars and things like that. And again, some really, really good managers in that, some terrible ones. But yeah, people that pitch in, people that will come and say, okay, we've got a bit of downtime. Right, we're going to use it. We're going to be busy. We're going to, tackle something that we haven't tackled for a while. Yeah, lots of different things that have gone into that.
Very interesting. And they talk about leadership like there are kind of 2 distinctive leadership styles, like hierarchical and more kind of free, egalitarian, they call it. And you mentioned a few times throughout your conversation. What is the leadership style, or what is the dominant leadership style in Cundall? How would you describe, and from your global management board perspective, what do you drive?
Yeah, I would say we have a very, very open leadership approach. And I think that's quite fundamental to our culture. But again, that's one that we have to be very aware of how that does work in, with anyone, but in different parts of the world. And there's actually quite a lot that we're doing at the moment to try and make sure that's a very open and trusting approach, but that it has that support that's needed when people need it. I've always loved that style. When I joined Cundall, I was amazed by it. But it did give you a little bit of kind of uncertainty because it's all on you. If someone says, look, that's your team, that's your budget, go and do it, then suddenly you have a little bit of vertigo. For some people, they love that and they go and do it. For other people, they're really challenged by that. But that doesn't make them less good at what they're doing. They just might need a bit more support. So again, it's that listening side of it. I think if you have a belief that your approach is right in all senses, it will be wrong. If you have an idea that you have an approach and you're constantly testing it and looking at how you improve it, then I think you're more likely to be successful. I personally have never liked being in a very hierarchical system, but I know that's very personal to me. And we have to allow people to sort of work in a way that optimizes, their career and their output. So, I mean, I should have said at the start, part of Cundall's purpose, so we have our purpose statement, is to create the best opportunity for our people. And so that very much comes into that how do you create the best opportunity for people? Well, that's quite a personal thing because opportunity is different for everyone. So when you're looking at a global practice, if we dictate onto someone what the best opportunity is, then it won't be. We fail. So to really hit our purpose, we have to be creating a framework that allows success, but then it comes down to a very individual level, which again comes back to that listening. What's right for you?
A lot of skills,
constantly
a lot
fascinating,
of blend.
yeah, and always going around your head, always churning it over and testing and thinking about it.
Very interesting. So, taking all of this into consideration, what advice would you give to a leader who is leading multicultural team or across multiple regions?
I'd say if I was reminding myself of what I think is important, I would say, yeah, just keep listening. You're never done. Like there's 8+ billion people out there and no one's the same. And so nothing's ever going to be perfect. And so I think if you're traveling around your business or talking to people in your team, every time you have a conversation, you're going to be learning something. As I say, the thing on top of that is when you're doing that is thinking about what you're trying to achieve collectively, what that person's trying to achieve, and how you're helping them to optimize what they're doing to be the best they can be, and trying to put those two together and then scaling that. How's that team going to work the best way it can? Or why is that team working really well? Learn from successes. And so that's, for me, it's a constant process. Whatever I'm doing, I find myself, I go to a conference and I'm trying to apply something to Cundall. And sometimes I've been to conferences where they're talking about, space travel and I was at a conference where Richard Branson was talking about tourism on the moon. And I'm sitting there thinking, that's really interesting. How does that apply to Cundall? What are we doing? Why is he thinking like that? How's that working? And I think if you're in a leadership role and you're not doing that, then you're just going backwards. That you've got to be thinking all that time, and in those conversations you're having with people, what am I learning? I'm not telling you stuff. I'm talking, having a discussion, and I'm learning as well. Because if I'm not helping you to be better, then I'm useless.
One more question, Jonnie, about talking and going back to younger you and your first experiences working in the restaurant and then growing into a big global leadership role. What advice would you give to someone young and new starting their career?
I think what's made my career so far, because I'm still the younger me, I loved every minute of it. So I think find that sort of joy in what you're doing, and whatever task you're doing, if you have that background thought of how could we be doing this better, or why did that work well, why did that not work so well? And then as you're having those interactions with people, clients, project teams, your own team in the business, for me that's been definitely my most rewarding element. And yeah, if I'm starting out again or there's someone starting their career, that's it for me, is just, I'm constantly feeling like I'm learning. And you don't learn, I listen to podcasts and you read lots and things, but you learn the most from people. And if you don't see every conversation you have as an opportunity to learn and to develop yourself, then I think you're missing an opportunity, but you're just not going to enjoy things as much. So yes, you might be realizing that your French wasn't as good as you thought it was, and you're being shouted at by a really scary person in a French kitchen, but still you're kind of thinking, but this is exciting. This is amazing. I can't cut stuff as quickly as the person sitting next to me or standing next to me, and I'm getting everything wrong. They're things that you remember back to, and working in good teams and why those teams worked well. For me, that's just fascinating. Why do things click? Trying to learn and learn from others.
Very interesting. So enjoy, find something that you really enjoy and learn, keep learning.
But even if you don't enjoy the task you're doing, enjoy the situation.
Find
because
the joy.
the person that's telling you what to do, you're learning from them. You're thinking, it might be a boring task. How could this be done better? Has someone else done it better? Maybe afterwards you kind of look back on it and think, why was that so boring? Why, how can we automate it? How can we change it? For me, that's definitely the way to make the best of your career.
Curiosity as well, right? Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jonnie. It's been really
pleasure.
interesting to have you with us.
Thank you, Olga.